Welcome everyone out there listening to this webinar. My name is Todd Taylor. I'm the host. We will get started in just a minute. If you'd like to use the rename function, you can click on the three dots next to your tile, and you can add, if you would, please add an affiliation. And if you want to use pronoun references, we invite you to do that as well, as I have just done. We need some of your electronic music to wake us up this morning. Great, everyone's. We have attendees filing in. And we will get started in just a minute. Good morning, everyone. It is the top of the hour. Good afternoon, I guess, some people who may be in other time zones. Good afternoon as well. My name is Todd Taylor, and welcome to the Adobe Creative Campus Digital Literacy Cafe, where I have the great privilege of inviting my favorite people to sit around and have virtual coffee with me and talk about integrating digital agility and digital literacy experiences across the curriculum. And so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Todd Taylor, and my business card for Adobe has the wonderful title of Pedagogical Evangelist. I'm also an English professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I am broadcasting from at this very minute. And we're excited to have a conversation today with recent graduates who have gone through at least their undergraduate experience, having access to Creative Cloud from the moment they arrived on campus, and how that has impacted and shaped the entry-level careers that they have now just started. And so first, I'd like to introduce a former student of mine, Valentina Arizmendi. Valentina, if you'd say a quick hello.
Hi, everyone.
And Valentina, where are you right now?
I'm in San Francisco.
Great. And we also have with us today Vincent Fu.
Hi, nice to meet y'all.
Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. If you'd like to use the chat pod to just say a quick hello and where you're from, that would be great. If you want to ask questions for us to answer, though, please use the Q&A option and place your questions there. This is a webinar format, and so you won't be able to share, the audience won't be able to share your microphones or your cameras. So the way we'll interact is through the Q&A pod and through the chat pod. This session is being recorded, and so if you put anything in the chat pod or in the Q&A chat pod, that will be available through the transcript. I'm also enabling the live transcript right now. If anyone would like to use the closed captioning feature, that's going to be available as well. And so again, it's my great privilege, and it's thrilling to me to talk with the beginning and the end of the reason we are all educators, and that is to create really meaningful and valuable experiences for students. Those of you who know me know that I've been an English professor since 1997 at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I often directed the first-year writing program. And one of the things that folks like me who direct writing programs think about is how we can help students become digitally literate alongside other literacies that are all merging and converging in our digitally transformed cultures and economies today. And so the idea that I've always been playing with as an English professor is trying to move my students away from being passive, disconnected consumers of other people's content to becoming active, connected producers of their own ideas. And the way I approach that is imagining opportunities for all students equally, all across the curriculum, at all levels, and all backgrounds and all experiences, to begin developing those abilities and having those experiences the moment they come to campus, especially in the first year writing program that I used to direct. Because the idea is that these abilities are so fundamental and so important that it takes years of experience and scaffolding to build and stack these abilities on top of each other, so that eventually we can say that we are, as campuses, are following through on our explicit and implicit promises to equip students with the experiences and abilities that are valuable across every career and every profession today. And so we're going to hear from two recent graduates. First, Valentina is going to share her story in just a few minutes about what it was like for her to become a digital storyteller as she moved through her program of study at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I am physically at the moment. And then Vincent Fu is going to talk about his experience first being an undergraduate at the University of Utah, and now pleased to say with days away from actually being awarded his MD as he begins his residency in Chicago. So Valentina, if you would share your screen and tell us your story of digital literacy as you were an undergraduate at UNC Chapel Hill.
I sure can. Can everyone see that? Or can you guys see that at least?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Valentina Arizmendi. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and this is my story from my very first year as a student to now my first year in my career. I had the lucky pleasure of being right in the middle of this COVID pandemic era, where I had 2 years of school that were normal and everything I expected them to be. And then I had 2 years where like no one really knew what was happening. And I had two very different experiences because of it. So when I came onto campus in 2017, I had enrolled in an English class, and I wasn't really sure what to expect. One out of a college class, two out of a English class, and then three out of an English class that had promised it was going to be like all about digital storytelling. And so Todd Taylor was my professor, and he very quickly told us that this class wasn't going to be easy. We were going to be telling stories in 5 different modalities, and they were all going to be new to us. But in my mind, I was like, why would that be so hard if it's going to be the same story over and over? To me, it just seems like we have to work really, really hard on the first story and then just like retell it over and over and over again. I didn't have experience telling stories through all these different modalities. I was very used to like the written story, maybe even a spoken story during presentations, but the rest of these formats were very new to me. And so the story that I decided to tell was on a historic theater in Chapel Hill called the Varsity Theater. And I titled my project Running Varsity because most of it focused on the owner. And I'll kind of take you guys through that. The very first thing that we created was the magazine, because again, that was like the format that we were all used to the most. It was a lot of words with a few pictures thrown in, but that text brought a sense of comfort. We very quickly switched over to the film, which is the first time that I realized like, oh wait, I have to completely rewrite the story. I can't be using my own words. I have to use the words from the interview that I gathered, and I have to pick like really exciting imagery, the video, the B-roll. And then we created the podcast, which again, also had to change the story. The mobile app and the website, that was more things that I could create content with. And so I remember I took a more historical approach, really showing the history of the theater. And at the very end of the semester, when I was looking back at it, I was like, wow, these are actually 5 different stories. They're all on the same subject, but they each took a different angle because they were each for a different audience. They were being consumed in a different way. And that was really cool to come out of a class saying you learned 5 different things. Usually you take one class, you learn one overall thing. But there was like a million things that I learned from this class. And that semester, it was a really impactful class for me. So I kind of took what I had learned that year and I kept trying to apply it to all my classes in the future. So by the time I reached my sophomore year, I still had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. I came in as a pretty undecided major. I was taking classes in any topic you could think of: business, econ, political science, English. I was just trying to figure out what can I make work for me. And in every single one of those classes, I was like, well, I really enjoyed creating these things in my English class. How can I bring that into each class? And so in my business classes, I was like, okay, you know what? We have to pitch a product. Why don't we actually show what that product is going to look like? Why don't we make it in XD? My political science classes, I was like, I had to give a presentation and I was like, this is pretty boring. Why don't I add a visual to it so that people understand what I'm talking about? And so that whole sophomore year, I was really making the connections click of you know what, all of these are different topics, but I'm trying to present all of them visually. I'm trying to excite my audience. I am trying to get them to really understand what I'm talking about, getting them from point A to point B. And the way that I was doing that was with visuals. And then came up my summer, so the varsity theater, that was a pretty low stakes project. It was a local theater. It was kind of amusing. It was a really fun project. And when I was thinking about what I want to do with my summer, I was like, what if I did that same thing, but maybe applied it to something that was a little more important to me, something that mattered more. This summer would have been the summer of 2019. And I was born and raised in Venezuela, but I moved when I was 5. And I used to go back every single summer. The entirety of summer, I would spend my 2.5 months there. But I had to stop in 2009. And so 2019 would have been my 10th year not being able to go back to Venezuela. And, the 10th year really hit me. I was going through that phase of college where I was getting a little homesick. I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so this project, when I started thinking about it, I was like, you know what, if I did this storytelling project for a local theater, why can't I do that about my own culture, my family? And so I applied to this fellowship that would fully fund a summer. And I went off to LA. And I found a community of Venezuelan immigrants who shared their stories with me. I got to listen. I got to retell it, package it in a way that was more shareable. I went in thinking it was going to be me doing this huge service for them, getting their stories out there. But by the end of the summer, I realized all of the growth that I had done, just being able to really spend time with a lot of questions that I hadn't gotten to answer in another way, and seeing everything visually, being able to listen and talk to these people one-on-one. That was something that was really special for me. It just put everything into perspective. And it was one of those out of classroom experiences that you can't really replicate. You have to do it outside the classroom. And the only reason I got to do that was because I had the comfort of doing it inside the classroom first. It gave me all this confidence to be able to move across the country by myself for the first time, and take on a project that I didn't know if it was going to succeed or fail. So by the time I came back after that summer for my junior year, I was really starting to put all the pieces together. I was like, you know what? I am interested in visual design. I'm interested in communicating, but all of these really important topics matter to me. So how can I be marrying the two together? I spent my junior year really just building on what I had learned. I was creating things like infographics. I was creating videos. I was creating magazines. And I was doing them on topics that really mattered to me. I was doing them on mental health. I was doing it on gender equality, health disparities, all of these topics that are very serious and can be very hard to wrestle with, but I had the confidence of knowing like I know how to communicate a topic. So it wasn't really the topic that would scare me anymore because it was like the communication piece that I was really focusing on. This led me to finally figure out what I wanted to study. It wasn't until 3 years in that I figured this out, but I was majoring in journalism to be able to communicate those stories. And then I was minoring in digital literacy because I wanted to communicate stories through digital modalities. And then I tacked on this other minor, social and economic justice, because I was trying to communicate stories through digital modalities about meaningful subjects. So at this point, everything was going great. I finally figured out what I wanted to do. I was enjoying my classes. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, this is what my classes were looking like. It was all of us gathered around Zoom, trying to keep our eyes open, not all necessarily always succeeding in keeping our eyes open, but it was a really hard transition. I remember it was in the middle of the spring semester, and all of a sudden we were like, what do we do? Like, I didn't even have a desk in my room. I was just taking all of my Zoom classes from my bed, trying to figure out like, how can I get the angle right so that you don't see my pillow? And those were a lot of things that I was worrying about. I was like, I can't be focusing on my learning right now. But then I had my internship with Adobe like coming up very quickly that summer. And I knew that my project was going to be telling the story of Hillary in Dallas, who was a student at MIT, and she was using science communication, marrying the two, the art and the science. And I had this idea of what I wanted to do, but then all of a sudden we were virtual, it was COVID, I was not going to be able to see her face to face. I had to very quickly scramble. And so I had spent the rest of my spring semester really trying to figure out Zoom, trying to figure out what to do online. I had to like actually produce results during my internship. And it was a very quick adjustment. You know, I learned a lot of different digital tools. I learned After Effects. I was like, if I can't be in the same room as Hillary, let's make it look like I can still tell her story. I sent her a microphone. I had her record herself. And then I created all the visuals to go along with her voice recording. I ended up creating a motion graphic that told her story. And that was not something that I would have taken on had it not been COVID, because I would have gone the usual route, just like filming her in person, asking her questions, doing the usual interview. And I ended up being a lot happier with this result. It really pushed my comfort zone and I gained a lot of new skills because of it. So at this point, I went back to my senior year, more confident that I could really be successful online. That year, I wrote a thesis and it was all about, you know, it like really was inspired by my experience of multimedia in an online learning classroom. And so that's what it was about. It was exploring how students can learn differently based off of different multimedia uses, everything ranging from just a PowerPoint with a lot of words to actual motion graphics. That thesis got me highest honors, which was one of the things that contributed to me winning the Outstanding Graduating Senior Award in Journalism, which was just, you know, like the cherry on top for my senior year. I had been worrying my mom like the last 4 years that I didn't know what I was going to do. It all seemed like a very scary path. And, you know, I think this award like finally did it for both her and myself, that I had made the right decision and everything was working out the way that it was supposed to. So after graduation, I very shortly moved to San Francisco, where I am now, and I am now producing student content for Adobe so that other students can also have the same experience, wonderful experience that I did in school. So that's a very brief summarized version of my story. I will stop sharing and hand that over to Vincent.
Valentina, thank you for that. That was amazing. Vincent, if you'd unmute your microphone and camera and come on screen. So we're doing really good to the east. We have folks from the UK and Scotland and Nottingham and Albania who've joined us this evening, I guess, in their time zone. And we're only as far west as far as I can see from the chat pod in terms of Arizona and Utah. So thanks for being with us. this morning. This is being recorded. If you need to use closed captioning, you can do that. We just heard from Valentina Arizmendi, who I used to say was a student in my class, never my student, because like most of the students who get an introduction to this digital storytelling in my class, they are quickly lapping me in their abilities, which is as it should be. And speaking of victory laps, Vincent, a lot of exciting things happening in your life right now. Would you please also share your story of digital literacy as a student, beginning at Utah and now where you are in medical school?
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, just want to say I did see somebody say hello from LA as well, so never want to leave out our West Coast friends as well. But yes, as Todd mentioned, I am coming in from, let's see, I should share my screen. I'm coming in from Denver, Colorado, and am currently finishing up my last week of medical school. I will be graduating on Friday, and that's when I'll be officially conferred the MD degree. So very excited for that. But before that, it's my pleasure to be part of this chat today and to share a little bit of my journey from high school to now a residency in emergency medicine in Chicago. So without further ado, moving on to the next slides here. So again, I'm Vincent Fu. I'm a fourth-year medical student here at the University of Colorado. I'll be going into emergency medicine, and I also run my own freelance digital design business called Arctic Fox Media. So today, just briefly, I'm going to share how I came to define my professional pillars of design, fitness, and medicine, three very different fields that are important to me and have developed through my journey in digital literacy. And over the last few years, I realized that I don't just have to be a doctor or just be a design professional. Really, my whole professional career this far is based upon digital literacy in a non-traditional field. So I really found myself embracing that and creativity in STEM. While in med school, I discovered that I love being an educator as well. So I'd like to share my Adobe story briefly. My journey from being a young creative to embracing digital literacy and digital fluency in my career to now creating curricula as an educator. Okay. So we began in my childhood. I started early in primary school discovering Photoshop 7 and really began to learn the basics of photo editing and creativity, what would later become known as digital literacy. And as I entered high school, I took a course in Adobe Illustrator, which introduced me to really the whole Creative Cloud ecosystem, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and all the rest of Creative Cloud as well. And the results that I had were improving with every project. And as I continued to develop my skills and expand to other Adobe solutions, I really became hooked on Adobe Creative Cloud and everything that it could offer to my career. And so as I entered college at the University of Utah, I had a good sense of how to make things digitally and express my creativity through digital design. In my hometown of Salt Lake City, I was lucky to stay there for undergrad, and part of the campus is actually visible here. And this is why I love visiting home still, because who wouldn't want to wake up every morning to this view from their driveway? This is actually a picture from my parents' driveway. They'll be visiting later this evening, and I'll be picking them up so they can attend my graduation, which is very exciting. By this time, I had learned to use a variety of Adobe solutions and applied my skills to every single extracurricular activity that I was involved with. And I used my knowledge in Adobe solutions to not only bring value to each organization, but also seize the opportunity to further develop my skills. I also served as an Adobe ambassador and presented workshops for our entrepreneurship programs. And every project I finished strengthens my extracurricular skills and opened new doors. I was featured in an Adobe Education Spotlight upon graduation. So this story so far would be great for a student studying design or a marketing major, but as you may have correctly assumed, I didn't study either of those in undergrad. And I actually graduated with a degree in biology. So where is the connection to digital design and by extension, social media? Well, I always say the key lies not in what specifically I've been creating, but in the way of thinking that I've developed through digital creativity. And by way of thinking digitally, the skill of communicating visually was honed as well. And this was a big turning point for me because I realized I could start applying what I've been practicing to my curricular studies as well. This is a poster that I made for my undergraduate research symposium, and it really allowed me to communicate my research in a poster format that was attractive and easy to understand for anybody, whether they're in science or not, to show up and just read through my poster. So this was going great in college, but in January of my senior year, with only 4 months to go before graduation, I entered a state of panic that a lot of seniors experience. What do I do after graduation? And so I interviewed for a few jobs, but many of them were not really suited to my interests, or I didn't really consider myself relevant to that position. Like I didn't want to work in a lab for the rest of my career with a biology degree. And so it was time for the real world to shock me. Fortunately, I was referred to a medical tech startup in Salt Lake City called Prolong, where I was hired as the marketing manager. And I designed new branding for the company and was able to participate in creating our marketing assets as well. So Prolong is a pre-medical device company targeting lung cancer detection with their technologies. And after a few months, I quickly became the driving force of our small company's marketing, developing collateral such as this company overview and this presentation deck that our CEO used for investors. So all this was great, but I wanted to do a little bit more, and I dreamt of being my own boss and running a freelance side gig. And so my own digital design small business, Arctic Fox Media, was born in 2017. And this is still actually my license plate that I have on my car right now. I'll be driving this over to Chicago in 2 weeks' time. And yeah, I'll be continuing this sort of strong personal branding journey and journey in digital literacy as well. So after getting this job at Prolong, I had numerous choices when it came to career paths, and using design thinking as my approach to marketing, both for my employer and for my personal branding as well, it opened doors for me in ways that I never could have imagined. And then one day I got a call in 2018, and I started medical school in Colorado. Now, you would think that starting medical school and having to study as much as we do would result in the end of my Adobe story, but of course, that's certainly not the case, and I'm still here talking to you today about these very relevant topics. And I'm still pretty addicted to Adobe, even in the medical field. I have to say that in the classroom, it was a real asset for me to put my creative skills and experience to work. I used Adobe Spark Pages, like Valentina just used, to make my presentations for small group learning. And one of the weeks I was feeling extra creative and I made an entire infographic to present the facts on antidepressants. Designing handouts like this textbook style overview was another one of my favorite ways to teach information. And creations like these are especially great for sharing my personal brand and what I have learned with my fellow classmates and the body of medical knowledge online. And so in third year, as I was creating digital pieces to apply directly to my clinical rotations, I continued to develop these real-world medical application skills. And working with our deans, I also had the opportunity to create the student guidebook given to every first year in their orientation week. What was a 60-page Word document before was transformed into a 2-part brochure designed to welcome students to our school and our city and delight them and get them excited about our medical school experience. I also had the pleasure of creating class videos in association with our deans and our leadership, and most recently, during our match day, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to create the video that was shown to all of our families as well. So media projects are great, but I realized halfway through my third year rotations that design thinking in action also works for clinicians as well. So this is a patient notes template that I created for my own reference and use while learning. And I use these and I fold these up and carry them, literally carry my patients in my pocket as I go through rotations so that I'm able to keep track of everything that needs to be done for patients, and I make specific templates for each rotation. That was one for emergency medicine. Here's one for an ICU rotation, my intensive care rotation, that really was customized to what we needed to talk about and what was relevant for us in that rotation. And similarly, that folded up into a nice little sheet that I kept in my pocket to keep track of my patients. So with this interest and skill set, I developed and teach a novel curriculum for digital literacy in medicine. Digital MD is an elective aimed at making the doctors of tomorrow ready to take on challenges of telehealth, social media engagement, and public advocacy, things that have become incredibly relevant for our world through the pandemic. And so just going real quick through our needs assessment survey, we asked our student body some attitude questions. Do you agree that you would like to be able to create digital educational content such as infographics, videos, posters, and animations? And so half of our medical school survey said that they would like to create these digital educational content. And so then we asked, how many of you actually know how to create these digital assets? And over half of those respondents said that they don't know how to create those digital assets, and only 1 in 5 say that they do. So taking the data one step further, of those half that said they would like to create them, how many of those students actually know how to create that? And of those 65 respondents, over half said that they would like to, but don't know how. And this red bar represents the gap in our medical education that we sought to address. Our medical curriculum here at CU really sets us up for clinical and communication skills, but there is a demand for digital literacy in medicine that was not being fulfilled. And so we developed our modules to fill those gaps in our medical education. Our first module was just defining basic terms of social media and digital scholarship. What is social media? What are its powers? And how can that contribute to the digital body of knowledge? Our second module looks at the legal and ethical pitfalls. This is what keeps school administrators up at night, the fear that medical students would break HIPAA or other legal restrictions in their sharing of medical content or patient stories on the internet. And it's one reason why so many education initiatives on this topic is akin to abstinence only, saying that med students are discouraged from using online social media altogether rather than being taught proper use. Our third module explores the various roles of online citizens, sort of what Todd mentioned at the beginning of this session, transitioning from being a lurker to being a contributor or a producer or a synthesizer or a critic on social media and contributing to that body of knowledge within their area of expertise. And our fourth module is developing this professional identity and personal branding, something that I developed and I teach. This is the module that I give a lecture on in this course. In the realm of medicine, we want people to be comfortable speaking from a place of scientific authority, yet still human enough to maintain the artistic side of medicine. And of course, we have to teach students how to learn to assess, evaluate, and improve upon the digital body of knowledge in medicine. So going over digital scholarship education theory in the same way that music theory guides the composition of great pieces, or an educator may use flipped classroom or game theory for pedagogical reasons, so too does this digital scholarship education theory guide the creation of digital media. And of course, we had a lab session as well, where we applied Adobe Creative Cloud and applied educational principles to help students create an online medical resource, identifying their educational objectives, appropriate media, options for creation, and of course, options for dissemination. So our students created podcasts, infographics, short videos or films, and really anything that they'd like to explore in the digital media sphere. And of course, nothing is worthy without peer feedback. So our students created a capstone educational project and then got peer feedback from us and their peers in the course to help improve their digital creative projects. So looking at student capstones, from this elective, these 3 infographics were made by students as their capstone project. You can see that given the right tools, medical students can create timely, impactful contributions to their area of expertise. And this represents the creative value that digital literacy can have for current medical students, even during the preclinical years. And one of our students tweeted this during a discussion about COVID-19, December 2020. He replied to a major thread about statistics with his infographic, and truly he reached thousands of people after this MDMPH retweeted it to her audience as well. And so this goes back to what I was saying. Digital literacy is truly a way of thinking, and being able to apply their skills to this very timely post and discussion helps them gain recognition very early on in their career. This student is now currently entering his clinical rotations as a third-year medical student, and having this huge background online already has certainly helped his sort of personal brand as a physician. And so, practicing what I preach, this is a poster, again, that I made for a presentation for Digital MD itself. This kind of goes over everything that I've just talked about and is, a big representation of how we think about Digital MD in an academic sense and from a research sense as well. And so if you search the Digital MD hashtag, we're slowly, Dr. Zuckerman, my mentor, and I, who co-created the course together, are slowly building this Digital MD revolution over on social media. So what's next? For me, I'm thrilled to share that I've matched with my first choice residency at Loyola University in Chicago. These are my co-residents with whom I'll spend the next 3 years of my life alongside, and I look forward to meeting them in about 2 weeks' time. And I feel so lucky and so loved by everyone who's been a part of my journey through medical school, finally attaining this next huge step of my career. So please find me in the Windy City starting this summer. And as for my academic projects, Digital MD in its current form will conclude as a proof of concept curriculum developed at the University of Colorado. However, I think my digital literacy background will continue to live on in different forms as I continue to develop and integrate digital pedagogy and innovation into my medical career. I'm still thinking of other projects, and digital literacy is a huge part of my life, and it's been a huge transformative part of my life. So certainly it's something that I don't want to let go of, and maybe there's even future potential for developing something bigger, but that's a story for another time. And as after all the things I've talked about, I must take time to reflect. Where does this journey really leave me? And so I'm 2 days away from officially becoming Vincent Fu, MD, and I'm going to be an emergency physician with digital prowess and creativity. I feel that I bring a truly unique value to Loyola, and I have somewhat unexpectedly found a career in education as well. So thinking in the context of digital literacy, creativity and brand value allowed me to build my own strong, well-branded individuality that carries me through so many aspects of my professional career. And I like to end with one of my favorite quotes. I think that you're participating this morning or this afternoon because you are a leader in empowering your students to be successful in your careers. When you think innovatively as an educator and you provide dynamic curricular design, you're giving your students the tools and the background needed to unlock integrative and multidisciplinary opportunities in their future. And of course, with Todd Taylor being here and inviting me to talk today, one of his things that he said to me recently is, I've come to the realization that I do, in fact, hail from a family of teachers. Both my parents and their parents, too, have had many years of experience and opportunities teaching in various roles and disciplines. And I'm very proud to follow in their footsteps and become an educator as well as a physician as well. So thank you so much for your attention. Please feel free to ask any questions, both to me and Valentina, and I'm happy to chat with you today during this Digital Literacy Cafe. Thanks so much.
Amazing, Vincent. Actually, no, amazing, Dr. Fu. I don't know if I'm the first to give you that, to use that title that you've earned. To hear the story continue to grow and continue to thrive. And so, Valentina, if you would unmute your camera and microphone. We're going to have a conversation now. And we invite everyone to put questions for Vincent and Valentina in the chat pod. There's one we're going to get to in just a minute about healthcare professionals that we'll ask Vincent to look at. What some of you may not know is that both Vincent and Valentina were on campuses that were what are known as officially designated Adobe creative campuses. And what that means materially is that each of those campuses, the University of Utah, and in fact, the University of Colorado Medical Campus in Anschutz, and the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill, is enabling all students to have access to Creative Cloud everywhere across the curriculum at no charge to students. And so that commitment to digital literacy across the curriculum is what defines an Adobe Creative Campus. And at the heart of it is exactly what Vincent was just talking about, really seeing and believing that digital literacy is a way of thinking, a way of knowing. Now that you have a graduate degree, you can use the big word epistemology, that digital literacy is an epistemology, is a way to understand and to share knowledge and to develop that knowledge. And so having these technologies, these solutions available to students to see whatever they might come up with, and the difference and the similarities between Valentina and Vincent are so impressive to see what they've been able to do. I put a link in the chat pod for those of you who may not know what the Adobe Creative Campus program is. You can find out more there. We are going to be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this that includes a link to the recording, as well as links to resources like the ones we'll be putting in the chat pod. And so I see two questions in the chat pod, in the Q&A pod. I'm going to ask the first question. You know, it's sort of a classic reflection generative question. I'm going to ask you, Valentina, first. If you could, transport in time and go back and give yourself some advice when you started your undergraduate career, knowing what you know now regarding the role of these digital technologies in the way the world is turning now, what would that be to you specifically? And then also, this is a little bit more of an imaginative question. What would you tell your best friends about the importance of these abilities and these experiences to their benefit? Because obviously, both of you found your way through the curriculum and through your interests in design thinking and digital literacy, and that kind of progressed one step at a time. But you did that right along some other folks who may not have had kind of the same experiences. And so, first to yourself, and then to your classmates, what advice would you give incoming students at this moment?
I would say one of the things that helped me the most was reflecting on what had the most impact on me. So like I would walk around campus and there was this wall of projects that I would always just like stop and stare at, because I was like, wow, I cannot believe that like my classmates, people who are supposed to be like at a similar level as me are creating these things. And it was like inspiring, but it was also very intimidating. And I just had no idea how I could get to that level. And sure enough, a year later, it was one of my projects that was like up on that wall. But in that year, there was a lot of like moments where I had to take a step back and ask myself, like, why were those projects inspiring? Like what made me stop in the middle of the hallway to stare at them? And so I think like for any career, any project, so you should find like what makes you stop and go, wow, like I want to do that. Because I think like that's where you will find your most success, because you are trying to achieve something that inspires you. And it's kind of a cycle that can keep going. Someone's one day going to look at you and be like, wow, like that's the project that I want to make. And I think that's how you keep growing, every single time the projects are supposed to get better and better and better.
I know what you're talking about, and I agree. And like, for instance, we were talking just the other day about how when you were sort of stuck in the pandemic, having to tell this story about Hillary in Dallas, you really developed your After Effects skills and your motion graphics abilities because you didn't have any other choice. You had a story that you really wanted to tell, and you couldn't fly to Massachusetts to interview Hillary at MIT. So you taught yourself these technologies in the pursuit of having a story you wanted to tell, and not so much as an end of themselves in itself. You weren't really necessarily saying, I want to learn software. but I want to learn how to tell a compelling story because the story matters to me. And so that's a great piece of advice. Thanks for that. Vincent, over to you. Same question. If you could give advice to incoming students now, both maybe yourself or students who were right alongside you at the University of Utah who had access to Creative Cloud but maybe didn't find a way to have these kinds of experiences that you did, what would you tell them?
I would say the biggest thing is to keep an open mind and do something that you're not super comfortable with at first. Because one of the biggest reasons that I heard people were hesitant to use Adobe Creative Cloud or even try it for the first time, both in undergraduate in many disciplines and also in, people registering for my course. They would say, oh, I've never done design or digital literacy or thinking, or I've never done anything digitally on the computer, so I don't think this course would be very fitting for me because I just don't have that experience. It's truly, when we designed the course, we made it so that there were no prerequisites, and that includes no prerequisites in digital design or Adobe experience. We could learn. I mean, the beauty of the course being so small is that we could meet learners where they were at and either help them get their feet wet and start creating with really easy things like Adobe Creative Cloud Express, which was recently rebranded from Adobe Spark for those who might be familiar. It was just something to get people thinking creatively. And I think that's the biggest thing. To sort of directly answer the question from Albania is it's helping older physicians or non-digital natives who may not feel super comfortable with digital creation, is really thinking, that epistemological, I'll get used to that word as a grad now, as a grad student, but thinking in that way of thinking, right, where you're not necessarily just creating to be creative, you're creating in a way that helps you share your expertise a little bit more clearly and to a wider audience. So I reached back and pulled these two books that I keep on my bookshelf because I like to use them as examples, and they're some of my favorites. This is a book created by it's a creator of a YouTube channel called Philip Detmer. He is not a scientist, not a physician, but I think he creates a lot of scientific content for YouTube and sort of writes the scripts for really sort of like explanatory videos of really good topics. It's called Kurzgesagt. This is their mascot, this duck that I keep in the back. This is actually their calendar, and this is their book. So I'm a bit of a merch person for them. But this is a book called Immune, and this was released sort of after the pandemic, going over, very medical topics in a very visual way about how immune systems work and how our bodies respond to infections and things like COVID. And so this is mostly written as a book, but as you can see, there's many very good illustrations in here that are directed towards the general public. And this author is certainly not, a physician or anybody that you would expect to see this sort of content from. And indeed, a lot of the older physicians who may not be digitally literate or comfortable with sharing their expertise in a visual and creative way like this, wouldn't, what they write is just very scientific. And that's okay, because that is how science moves forward. But the problem is a lot of the general public does not find that in a format that is super consumable for them. And so that information does not get shared. But in products like this, in a book like this, it's really directed towards the general public who aren't physicians, who aren't medical professionals, and sharing that information in a way that everybody can understand. This is a book that was recently given to me, and this is not anything medical or scientific, but I was stunned when I opened the covers and saw that this entire book is completely graphically oriented like this. And I've never written a book myself, but I know it's a lot of copywriting, it's a lot of editing, it's a lot of step-by-step process. But looking at this book, it's not only that, it's also the whole design aspect of it too. And to flip through this book, like I haven't had the time to just read it yet, but I'm very, very excited. And I know that this will keep my attention throughout the entirety of this book. So certainly These are examples of how people in various disciplines and various fields can use this visual thinking and this design thinking to really capture their audience and share what they want to share with the world.
Absolutely. And so your advice is for everyone, from first year students to senior faculty, to just imagine the possibilities and take Valentina's cue. Think about some information or a data story or evidence or a literal story that you just are compelled to share, and then begin with something as simple as Adobe Express, which I would submit to you is easier than most slide deck tools and even most word processors, in terms of just having to click a plus button and then sharing your story in actually beautifully visually compelling ways. And so we were thinking about students, and we were thinking about users who may not be as comfortable with this. But let's think about educational experiences and classroom experiences. And we'll go back to Valentina to think about this first. And the question here is, what sort of advice or recommendation would you give to faculty members from across the curriculum in terms of creating these kinds of opportunities that obviously it works so well for you, for potentially every student, not just the ones who kind of seek out this kind of opportunity, but in a first year writing class, in a first year seminar class, in intro to biology and intro to psychology, what sort of advice might you whisper in a faculty member's ear about the importance of supporting this kind of opportunity for all students across the curriculum? Valentina, what are your thoughts on that first?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice would be to just go for it without worrying that the projects aren't going to look good. Because I think at the end of the day, like, if students don't do this in the classroom, they're going to have to do it in the workforce either way, So it's better to at least have this small experience where it was low stakes, it was for a grade, and hopefully the grade doesn't depend on, oh, this does not look professional, this does not look the way that I pictured it, but more so like, did they try to understand the tools? Because I realized like a lot of my friends, like now they're in their first year and they have jobs that are not related to visual digital design whatsoever. But they work with teams that do. So they have to understand like how all the pieces work together. They have to understand how they're communicating their message about like their product or their service. And those are things that even if you're not actively working on the marketing, the campaigning, just like the visuals in general, you have to understand like how it's going to resonate with whoever your customer is. And that's just one of the things where like I keep getting like texts from my friends being like, oh, I have to like make this presentation, like, will you help me? Or like, oh, like I have to think about, like I had one of my friends who was like, oh, I have to work with the studio team and the marketing team, and like I have no idea how to like speak in their language. And it's little things like that where even if they knew like what B-roll means, that would already like take them a step forward. So I think it's just building the most like foundational level for these students before they are forced to learn it in the workforce.
Right. There's a question in the Q&A pod from someone, I hope I'm pronouncing this name right, Eni, who was asking about what to use with first year students, and was saying that they had used Spark and or now Express, and are kind of wondering what the approach should be. What's your perception, Valentina, about whether it's too early to introduce Creative Cloud or Rush or Premiere Pro in a first year class that has nothing to do necessarily with digital storytelling? Maybe it's an intro to psychology class or an intro to biology class. Where do you think it's where it'd be most appropriate to start introducing those kinds of applications?
I think it's always appropriate. I think, students, if they're given the challenge, like they will try to figure it out. They will try their best. Like maybe it'll get a little frustrating at some points, but at the end of the day, it's like none of the tools are so difficult that you don't know how to make like a box and put text in it. And so in like the simplest of features, just getting started and like experimenting, like you'll be able to create something. And there's like so many templates and things, like no one's gonna end up with a blank canvas, which I know like is probably the scariest part, is like opening up the app and seeing everything is blank. But just like getting started, there's so many resources online. I think like students are very digitally equipped these days to be able to come up with something, like getting their ideas on there. So I don't think it's ever too early. Like, yes, the progression from Express to like maybe Rush, and then to like some of the simpler ones like Photoshop, Illustrator, like that makes sense. But like you threw XD at us that first year, none of us had even heard what it was. And everyone came up with an app, whether it like was functional and worked, like that's something else, but we all did create something.
And as you know now, I was bluffing the whole way. I had no idea whether it would work. And everyone was so engaged with XD and prototyping mobile apps because it was so different, that I was really pleased that unit came off. Vincent, over to you. What advice would you give faculty now in terms of creating at least the opportunity or the option for students to be able to create and tell stories in this way everywhere across the curriculum, not just in sort of the usual suspect areas?
Yeah, one thing I hear a lot from faculty is that, oh, this sounds like it would be a lot of curricular change, and I'd have to change the way that I teach or have taught this course for 20 years, perhaps. One of the biggest things that I always try to share is that this doesn't require a huge shift in the way that a faculty member teaches their course. It certainly is a little new, and the faculty may need to have a little bit of familiarity with how Adobe Creative Cloud works if they don't before. But the biggest thing is allowing students the option to say, all right, maybe instead of writing a 3-page paper, maybe instead of creating a presentation in PowerPoint, they could create an Adobe Spark page that they present off of, but then is also immediately shareable to their peers and to the greater community online. And maybe instead of writing that 3-page paper, one could create a 2-minute video essay that shares the same information, that forces the student to be a little bit more creative, or I should say not forces, but allows the student the option to become a little bit more creative in the way that they share that same information that they would in a paper. But that also creates a product that is immediately engaging and, again, shareable to their peers and the online community. Like, how many students will share a 3-page paper that they wrote on any topic? Regardless of whether it's literature, whether it's science, whether it's language arts, or anything that they want to write about and analyze, nobody's sharing their essays online, and certainly if they do, nobody's reading those of their own free will usually. But if you create a 2-minute video saying, here's me analyzing the text and here's my take, you're saying the same thing, you're arguing the same points that you would in an essay, but arguably it's something that's much more engaging and something that people will actually want to watch and engage with online. And it also forces the student to think beyond just regurgitating things and citing sources in a paper format, which of course they should know how to do. But after getting those baseline skills, can they now create something in a creative way that is more engaging, that still forces them to think in that way of analysis and sharing their viewpoints and what they think of the literature or whatever it is they're analyzing, but also create in a way that allows them to build a new skill set alongside that same educational principle. So the biggest thing that I would share with educators is that it doesn't require a huge change. It doesn't require a huge push to say every student must use this and I must now also learn how to use this so I can teach my students. It's just saying, if our school offers Creative Cloud to our students and you have the option to create something, even if it's not within Adobe Creative Cloud, even if it's just Creative Cloud Express, which is free to use and students can use that to create a very basic video very easily. That's certainly something that can be provided as an option for those students who are more creatively inclined or who would like to try something new and gain a new skill set along the way of creating that same or of completing that same curriculum that they would otherwise do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that perspective. There's a question in the chat pod from Christine. who asked that so far the conversation has really been focusing on creativity. But if you look, if you dive deeply into the work that Valentina and Vincent have done, it's actually very academic and professional grade and intellectual. And my definition of that is that it's based upon evidence and reasoning and data and information. And what it really does is it takes complex ideas and concepts and tells a narrative about it or tells a story about it. So like the book that Vincent just held up on viruses, people can understand or do something with that data or information or evidence. And so even though we've been using the word creative a lot, I think when we're talking about integrating these kinds of experiences in higher education and certainly in scholastic and academic context, we are doing the same thing we've always done about knowledge production and sharing. And the idea is that in the world today, we're creating more opportunities for people to develop and share knowledge than just the sort of the singular modalities that used to be available to them. And so I think that we haven't emphasized that enough, but that is fundamental to the work that both Vincent and Valentina have done, and in terms of integrating this into the curriculum. In fact, if you think about the essential skill that everyone needs in the information age, it's to take data, to take evidence, to take information. And we have oceans, galaxies of information, and making sense of that information, that data, in a way that you're analyzing patterns, you're coming to understand, different data points in that collection, so that the classic move of research is to then publish or share your perspective on that data or that information. And I think that's at the heart of this kind of storytelling that's appropriate for especially academic and professional context. Valentina and Vincent, you were amazing as always. So great. Thank you for sharing this time with us. Thank you everyone for showing up today and listening to these really inspiring students. As I said before, there will be a follow-up email with links and a copy of this recording. Look forward to the next Digital Literacy Cafe, which will be happening in August, and look forward to having conversations with all of you about the Adobe Creative Campus program. Last thought, Valentina, before we say goodbye?
Last thoughts. I think while you were talking, I started thinking of the 4 C's, 5 C's. How many C's are there?
Well, there's 5 now, but
there's 5.
Go
well,
forward.
Yeah, anyway, I always like to add the confidence part, because that's really what being able to get people to notice your work. And I think that's what visuals do, is it just makes it so much more shareable, so much more attention grabbing. It gives you a sense of confidence. And I think that's one of those hidden C's that sometimes are forgotten, but just as important.
Yeah, there's a lot of C's that have been a part of education: collecting data, connecting points within that data, creatively problem solving with that information, and then communicating. That's one version of 4 C's. Career readiness and then confidence. We'll up the level to 5 and 6 C's today, based upon exactly what you were saying. That's a conversation we're having all the time about how important it is to help students build confidence in these ways by giving them opportunities to learn and to scaffold and scale. So thank you so much for that, Valentina. Vincent, what's your final thought for today?
I would say that students today are more likely than ever to succeed when given skills and the opportunity to develop in digital literacy. And I think examples like Valentina and myself, are certainly just one of many examples of student success after having these opportunities and being mentored by educators who are innovative in the way that they think and innovative in the way that they teach. I think one of the biggest problems in education and, certainly healthcare indeed, is the resistance to change and innovation. And more I've been seeing educators and physicians, clinicians who are teaching open their minds to new ways of educating and continually developing and changing the curriculum to better suit their students' needs and the modern world. Certainly, this pandemic over the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, has changed the world and the way that we think about digital education and the way that we use technology in education. And so, continuing to, innovate and really keep up with the times, I think is really critical to student success. And students, whether they're from high school or in an undergraduate study or even in graduate studies in any discipline, I think would benefit a lot from educators like everybody who's attending today who are innovative and who want to continue teaching in the most effective way possible. So, on behalf of me and Valentina as students, thank you to the educators who have guided us along the way. And I know that everybody here today will continue to influence their students in a very similar way as well.
All right. And so we're 3 minutes over. Thanks again for everyone for being with us today. Look forward to our next conversations. This was wonderful. Bye everyone for now. And so thanks. We'll talk soon. Great job as always. Amazing. Great to hear the stories growing. I'm going to shut down the webinar. We'll talk later. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you all. Have a great day or evening.